Well, hello plant lovers. It is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you to my channel. Thank you very much for finding me in this crowded world of orchid care videos on YouTube. I attempt to grow cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia without the help of greenhouses or grow lights or equipment. Really just me and them struggling along either inside or outside or not at all. So, plant lovers of the world, if they sound like your conditions and you're vaguely interested, do hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday. I am an amateur, my ramblings of that, but they might help you in your orchid journey. And our orchid journey today happens to be, I'm filming this on the 2nd of January 2025. Now, here's a secret, plant lovers. I tend to film in batches. So I can sometimes film 2 or 3 videos in a day. Depends what's going on in my orchid world. And then of course I post them every Friday. So they're not often in a time order. So I'm not quite sure when I'm going to post this. So I'm saying Happy New Year, and it might be late January or even February when this goes out. Anyway, 2025 plant lovers, it's going to be a great year. I'm moving this year, finally, my goodness me. So there's the new house, there's all the staging, all the orchid gearing up that I've got to do. Yowza. Anyway, looking forward to that. I have no fear of moving, FYI. Spent my entire childhood moving because I was a child of the services. My father was in the Royal Air Force, so we moved a lot, and I live for packing and moving. So there's that. And then the other thing is 2025 is my channel. Now, nothing's happening other than the same, but it's just very exciting to see how things develop and grow, which does lead us to today's video. So one of the great things about this channel is just corresponding with people all over the world and having a digital community of orchid growers everywhere, and quite a few in Australia. And one particularly, Walter, sent me a message and then contacted me on Instagram saying he was dividing an orchid of his and would I like some tubers? Of course is the answer to that. Walter and I corresponded through Instagram, and he very kindly sent me some tubers of today's video subject, which I know there's one here as well. You can't really see it, but maybe I should have a white background for you. It's Spiranthes australis. Look at that. And as you can see, it is very, very similar to its American cousin, Spiranthes odorata. So plant lovers, today we are going to be looking at this very, very lovely but tiny terrestrial orchid. So firstly, thank you, Walter. Thank you for thinking of me, and thank you for sending me the tubers. Now, that was in March, which is autumn, that Walter sent me his tubers as he was dividing them. Now, Walter lives on the central New South Wales coast, so that's much further north than me and a subtropical environment. But this orchid has the most incredible range. Firstly, Spiranthes, a large genus. There's Spiranthes all over the world, including Spiranthes odorata, which is from the southeast of the United States, white flower, similar twist. I've made a video, I've included mine in a video I made about terrestrial orchids, which I'll link above. And if I haven't made one, I will make a playlist about terrestrial orchids, and I'll lump all those together. So Spiranthes odorata, you in the States will be very familiar with. Here, it's quite a rarity, so I was thrilled. Mine is galloping apace and doing its thing. And the name, Spiranthes, you might get a sense, comes from the Greek, and the first bit is spira, meaning a coil, and anthos, meaning flower. Coily, spirally flower, there you go, Spiranthes. And australis, in this case, australis means southern in Latin, hence the name Australia. But funnily enough, this plant, although it is found in Australia, it's a native to Australia, it's not endemic. So it's found in a vast territory. So the curious thing is, it was first named by European, our great friend Robert Brown, who named a lot of plants in Australia. He came on, I think, several voyages, but a voyage in 1810, he came and saw this plant in bloom in the east coast of Australia and named it Spiranthes australis, thinking, of course, it was an Australian orchid, which it kind of is, but its range is massive. It actually starts in eastern Russia and Georgia and Iran, and then moves all the way across through Asia, through China, through India, down through Southeast Asia, so Laos, Myanmar, all the way down there, across into the Pacific, so Indonesia, across New Guinea and the islands around there, and then down the east coast of Australia and ends up in New Zealand. So what a massive distribution this orchid has. And Unlike its friend odorata, guess what that means? Fragrant. Spiranthes australis is not fragrant. And the common thing about its growth in all of those places is it lives in marshy, wet conditions or areas with heavy rainfall, so perhaps not necessarily a marsh. And the interesting thing is that Walter sent me some pictures of these growing in lawns in the area where he lives. Now that is subtropical, so plenty of subtropical rain, and it's not a monsoonal climate there, so it's pretty consistent rain. And this orchid was thriving. He was quite surprised to see it growing in lawns in people's front gardens because not necessarily that damp and wet. But so generally a marshy grower or in an area where there's consistent rainfall. And as you can see, mine are on little dishes at the moment because I keep mine sitting in a saucer so that they're continually wet, which makes me realize that I could actually grow these as I grow carnivorous plants, so Sarracenia and all those sorts of plants, because they sit in a saucer. They need full sun, same as these. But anyway, we're jumping ahead. Let's rein back and go to conditions. So as I said, my Spiranthes australis were sent to me by Walter, and he sent me the pictures of where it was so I could see it was in full sun. There's not a huge amount written about these plants actually in terms of care. So I decided they have a rhizome that looks a bit like an anemone rhizome actually. It's sort of like I seem to remember that it was like a two-pronged thing. Very technical description there. And I felt it might need a deep pot. Might not, but anyway, we'll see. I can't see any roots actually. No. Who knows if it doesn't need a deep pot, but I put it in a deep pot. I then used a mix, so it's a terrestrial orchid. It grows in fairly marshy areas, but you still want quite a good free draining mix, I think, so that it is not sodden, it's moist, if that makes any sense. So what I used was regular potting mix, but I mixed it up with small bark actually, and a little bit of larger gravel. So you could use something that you use in a regular bulb mix, for example. So if you're growing daffodils or tulips or something, and you want a fairly light free draining mix for bulbs, similar to this. However, I do use regular potting mix in it because basically it's like a herbaceous perennial garden plant. So nothing unusual in the potting. It is in plastic pots, as you can see, but I'm experimenting, plant lovers. Now that I've got both plants, all these rhizomes to flower, as you can see. So I have got 3 crowns and a flowering stem from each one. I think what I'm going to do is amalgamate them into a single pot next season. So what these plants do need is at full sun or part shade that's erring on the full sun. So particularly in the morning perhaps, and maybe a little bit of shade in the afternoon. But mine are in full sun all day, just about. I felt that was the best way to try and grow them. Having seen the picture of Walter's examples where they were in full sun on someone's lawn. So that's what I did. I think though they could take a little bit of shade, but not too much. Now Spiranthes odorata from the southeast of US can take a bit more sort of dappled light, but this one I felt I was going to try in full sun, and ta-da. So as I said, as you know, I am filming this on the 2nd of January. Happy New Year, plant lovers, which means it is midsummer here in Australia. And this is how they're flowering for me right now. Now, Walter's point further up, further north, that they are a spring flower, so that's a subtropical environment, so the blooms are a little earlier. But down here for me, the flower spikes appeared in very late spring, and now, of course, it's January, and they are blooming for me. So you can see the leaves are quite small and not really anything, although I must say, perhaps you can see there, most of mine have been eaten. So I would suggest you might want to keep your eye on slugs and snails if you're going to grow these. But luckily the flower spikes came out unhindered and unnibbled. So anyway, I think there you have the sort of the length of the leaf, which is quite short. So interesting little plant, and I think it would look much better bulked up in a pot. Now the rhizome will grow and vegetatively reproduce itself. Obviously, I'm assuming it's going to produce seed as well. Such a tiny flower, but we'll get to that. So hopefully seeds will drop in these pots and maybe I'll get some to germinate. We'll see. Maybe next year we can revisit propagation. So the flower, as you can see, there you go, they are really small, but the most electric fluoro vibrant pink. And you can really spot them a mile off, even though they're so tiny. So I think en masse, ta-da, ta-da, they would really look fantastic. So that's what I'm going to do next year. Now that I've proven to myself I can grow them, I'm going to bulk them all up so that they'll all grow together and just look wonderful. Look at that. I'm loving that color. Such a fluoro strong pink you just don't see in the orchid world. Isn't that wonderful? So hard to see, but the body of the flower is a deep sort of fluoro magenta pink and the lip is white. There you go, you might be able to see that. And structurally, obviously it looks like every other orchid flower really, but it spirals around the stem, as the name would suggest, identically to its American cousin, odorata. Interestingly, Spiranthes odorata, I just checking the Key website, has gone wild in Germany, which is very close to the native habitat of this plant. So I wonder if they're going to meet in perfect harmony and have interesting babies. So potting wise, as I've said, just a regular terrestrial mix. I've used regular potting mix and tried to loosen it up a little bit. But what I have, oh, there's another little plant coming up in this one. What I have done though is added a little bit of manure. So I just use out of the bag horse poo or whatever you can find, but something that's broken down a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, just to give it some natural fertilizer, I think. Anyway, look at that one. Absolutely wonderful. You could, though, use topical slow release fertilizer, and I don't bother with any other fertilizing, to be honest. I mean, maybe if my mind was onto it, I would give it liquid fertilizer during the growth season. So it does basically become deciduous, herbaceous, so it will die down to almost nothing in winter. I think it depends on how cold your temperatures are. Now, I don't think this is particularly hardy, so the areas that it grows is quite temperate, and it doesn't grow in areas where it does get frost. But it is basically herbaceous, so it might survive in warmer, cooler climates, if you know what I mean. So somewhere like maybe southern Britain or Cornwall, you might be able to grow these outdoors, but you'd definitely be able to grow them, I think, in an unheated greenhouse in Europe and in parts of North America where it's where you have cold, freezing winters. But if you don't, if you live somewhere Mediterranean or subtropical or warmer temperate like us, we're sort of halfway between warm temperate Mediterranean, you can grow them outside all year as long as you keep the moisture up to them. So I just sit my little saucer and I make sure that saucer is always moist and off you go. I've actually just got mine for the sake of this video in these saucers. I found these in a thrift store, an op shop, and they're 70s Noritake, but look at that pattern, isn't it wonderful? Very Italian brutalist. We all grew up, well, some of us perhaps grew up with Noritake. It's very 60s, 70s childhood porcelain. There's a weird segue. And then, as I said, I just realized that I do grow carnivorous plants and they want exactly the same conditions. They want bright, direct sun, they don't want to freeze, and they want to sit in a source of water and be wet. So, when we move, plant lovers, maybe I can mess around and have strange containers full of different things. Anyway, we'll see. But what I'm definitely going to do is pot these all together so that I get one pot and have bigger impact with these. But I am really loving them. So Walter, many thanks for reaching out to me. Many thanks for thinking of me when you were dividing yours. Many thanks for posting them to me at your own cost. Very generous of you. And here they are. They've flowered for me. They've done really well. And I'm really thrilled. It's not something that I've ever seen available for sale. It is native to my part of the world, but obviously in marshier areas. So I've just never been in a spot where I've seen these growing before. So I'm thrilled to have them. Thank you, Walter. So then I guess the temperature question perhaps isn't really relevant because they are going outside. So looking at the area where they're all a native to, they're obviously going to get quite warm, sunny, bright spring, summer conditions. And because they cover such vast territory as well, it'd be quite different. So New Zealand has a quite different climate to us, and New Zealand itself is very different from the South to the North Island. So quite a variety of climates, but nonetheless, it wants sort of bright, sunny, warm summers. I think the winters kind of almost doesn't matter because it does die down, but I don't think it wants to freeze. But who does? And we mentioned Spiranthes odorata, obviously from the same genus, but different parts of the world and different species, odorata. australis. So this is another terrestrial orchid that I've made a video about. So this is Stenoglottis longifolia. And this one is a Southern African terrestrial native species, completely unrelated. But for me, taking similar-ish care, this is basically a herbaceous perennial. So it's going to die down in winter. The tuber is then going to sort of go into dormancy. You want to keep it a little bit drier, and then it bursts into life in spring and produces beautiful leaves. And then late summer, early autumn, you'll get your spike of beautiful magenta flowers coming out from the center there. A softer lilac color than this, slightly larger flowers, and very, very long lasting as well. But very similar conditions, although this one I do give slightly more dappled light and not that much direct light. And I think this one might prove to be hardier because it is herbaceous. It does die down completely. So I think as long as it didn't freeze and was wet, it might well do very well in cooler parts of the world, as long as you, of course, have warm springs and summers. This, though, is really great in pots. Now, I was hoping mine would have bulked up by now. I think this is the fourth year I've had it, and I still just have one crown. Although I must say, this is perhaps the most vigorous I've ever seen the foliage. So that's promising. Hopefully next year I'll get another little growth point. If not, I'm actually going to buy myself 2 more plants this year and pot them together in a larger pot, a little like this, so that I can have a bit of a better display, because I feel one just looks a bit sad. Now, I've made a video about this. It's quite a few years old though, so the resolution might not be great, but I'll link that above. And if I haven't, I will make a playlist for all my terrestrial orchids so you can watch at your leisure. But there we are. It's quite fascinating because these are really easy for me to look after. So these can stay outside all year in the weather. I don't particularly protect them. I mean, they get a little bit of natural protection from just where they are, so they're not, they're not really battered necessarily, but they are still out in the elements. So if you have a similar climate to mine, then all of this group of Spiranthes and Stenoglottis will do very well. Very easy. You could almost use them, or you could use them as a garden plant if you've got the right conditions. So particularly moisture for this and not freezing, and dappled light for this one and not freezing as well. You could certainly use them as garden plants and they'd look amazing. I think with this though, you certainly need lots of plants because the flower, well, it's very bright, it's very visible, but they're really small. So I'm really grateful that Walter sent me a bag full of tubers because I've got all of these plants. And so it will look really striking when I bulk them up together. But yeah, I think one specimen wouldn't look great. So my advice would be, if you can, get yourself multiple tubers. So there we are, plant lovers. Many thanks again to Walter for sending me these and giving me this chance to experiment with this orchid. It's thrilling. My Spiranthes odorata is coming into its own. That'll flower slightly later in the season though for me. Stenoglottis is autumn winter flowering, and then it dies down in later winter. This in different parts of the world, spring flowering. For me though, it's early summer. Very easy group of orchids though to grow, particularly I think if you're a beginner or you don't have lots of specialist conditions, as I don't. A sunny spot and off you go. These will see you right. So thank you very much. This is as I said, my first video of 2025, although, yeah, not quite sure when it will go to air, but here's to a great year, plant lovers. I hope everything's well in your world, that all your plants are growing and thriving and doing what they should for you. Mine are, to some degree, but it's going to be a good year. I feel I'm going to really get my Lycaste game on point this year. I feel I've learnt a lot over the winter because I've managed to kill a few. I've managed to keep a few alive, and now I know what I've done wrong. So I'm very much looking forward to my Lycaste group of plants doing much better. And if I can actually get them to thrive, I can maybe start increasing my collection of those. Anyway, so all in all, 2025 is going to be great on the orchid front, I think. I'm moving, new conditions, new plants, new beginnings. Thank you, Walter, for sending me these tubers. Many thanks to you for tuning in last year and hopefully for this year. I post every week on a Friday, so hit subscribe if you want to know what I'm doing next week. Who knows what it will be, but I will. And I will hopefully see you next week.